Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Amanda Head with America's Voice News. For all of you Indiana folks out there, listen up, because I have a candidate for Indiana 7, J.D. Miniear, along with his beautiful wife, Kristina. And I do want to talk about your campaign, and I want all of you in Indiana specifically to listen up. But I first want to talk about the fact that Indiana, of course, is the Hoosier state and who that's named for. And let's talk about the significance of that as it relates to your project.
Well, Amanda, thank you for having Kristina and I. But 4 years ago, the Indiana Bicentennial, we started doing some research. How did we get this Hoosier nickname? Well, it turned out it's this person, this being the last day of Black History Month in February, a black preacher who was the greatest preacher of the founding era. A guy named Harry Hoosier, who was friends with George Washington, Betsy Ross, who was acclaimed all up and down the America's coast, and it's a story that's been overlooked. And even on our campaign website, we go to that. That was a legacy project with the Bicentennial Commission that we really love to tell the story. It should be a movie, we think. It's somebody who had the courage, got his freedom in Baltimore during the Revolutionary War, and he started out as a carriage driver. He was born a slave in 1750 in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and he got his freedom during the Revolutionary War. And they said, will you be a carriage driver for this famous Methodist bishop who came from John Wesley and England to start the new church, the Methodist Church of America in Baltimore. And it didn't take long, though, that Asbury realized, you got a greater anointing to preach than I do. And even though he couldn't read or write, born illiterate, he memorized hymns and scriptures, and he just lit it, wherever he went, he just lit up the country. And in fact, on 9/11, 1786, the first time any preacher in New York had ever been written up in the newspapers, they wrote about Harry Hoosier, this little black preacher. And that night in the Old St. John Church, over 1,000 people turned out. Then he would go up to New England, and future chaplain in the U.S. Senate, a guy named Jesse Lee, who was a New Englander from Massachusetts, and he would go on for 2 terms as the chaplain of the U.S. House of Representatives. He accompanied Harry. And so they did the gig, if you will, and went to Boston, 1,000 people, Providence, Rhode Island, 1,000 people. So it was whites and blacks, and he was Martin Luther King before there was Martin Luther King, because no one in that era could gather that many people to listen to such great preaching. And, one more thing to point out is Asbury said, Harry and I would baptize more people in one day than the average Methodist clergyman back in England their entire career.
Isn't that incredible?
So it's just an amazing story to celebrate here in Black History Month.
Absolutely. Kristina, I want to get your input. I mean, with such an incredible story, obviously nicknamed the Hoosier State, but a lot of people don't know about him. So with the Harry Hoosier Project, how are you guys hoping to get the message out about him?
Well, what we've been doing that's been so successful, and I think so important to any kind of school or education, we've been able to speak into the schools and to the families, and of course to the churches as well. But so many of the kids don't even have the right education or the right kind of history. So if you don't have if you have the wrong kind of history, what are you going to do in the present? How are you going to act? And it's amazing too in the time that we're in, and that's what we're dealing with. Slavery is such a form of socialism. And so here we are in these times back then dealing with the same kind of thing, and yet we're still pursuing freedom. And people need to know that. And our whole generation needs to understand that.
And you talk about wrong history, and there seems to be a pervasive attitude among my generation and Gen Z that our founding fathers were racist. But so many people don't understand not only George Washington, but Benjamin Rush, friends with Harry Hoosier, boosted him up as such a prolific preacher. But also George Washington, I'm sure as you guys know, wrote in his diary and wrote copious amounts of letters, even more than he did to his own wife, to Billy Lee, who was black. And Billy Lee often is credited with saving Washington's life, at least on 2 occasions, after Washington had lost a battle and attempted to run into enemy lines, and Billy Lee grabbed the reins of his horse and forced him to turn around. But we see these relationships throughout time, but the left has done such a good job of convincing the youth that everything about America is wrong. How do we fix that? You're running for Congress. Let's remind people, Indiana 7. How do we fix that?
Well, Abraham Lincoln, 160-some years ago, said, let the people know the facts, and we'll be free. And we think this Harry Hoosier story produces that and opened. It's like a flower. It's a 200-year-old mystery, really. How do we get that? How do we get that nickname? Well, it's the true story. But the facts. I mean, you and I worked in media, and my gosh, the fake news. In the presidential debates with the Democrats, they just throw out more garbage. Falsehoods, and we're always having to fight that. But we win. We read the end of the book. We win.
And speaking of countering fake news, I hope that this is 10 times more successful than that 1619 project with the New York Times. I read the curriculum and the things that they are teaching in that, and it's just absolutely repulsive. But everybody head to the website Miniear for Congress. It's MINIEAR for Congress.com. Again, running in Indiana's 7th district. So, Kristina and JD, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate having you on.
Thank you.
And we've got more coverage here from Cpac 2020 on America's Voice.